Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. As always for Thursdays, we are playing Dragon Ball FighterZ. We have not had a lot of time this week to work on bots or specifically improving skills via them. But we do expect to see some shifts from the players that have had said time.
Ready? Let's go!
As always, I'll be playing the role of the clueless offensive player who does far too many things and should never survive. It's all about the targeting this week. The more accuracy you have, the better your chances.
Great fight!
One of the main things we have managed to change a lot of mindsets in the team relative to the bots is when to launch the crouching and standing medium attacks and when to hold back on them.
All or nothing! Go!
今度はこっちからやらせてもらうよ。生意気だよ。その調子だ。その程度。そろそろ生意気だよお前。今度は死ぬかもね。俺が負けるな。ここまでだフリーザ。サイヤ人の底力だ。調子に乗るな。逃げられるか。調子に乗るな。そこだ。終わりだ。行くぞ。しまった。こんなものか。終わりだ。くだらん。筋はいい。
だがまだまだといったところだな。
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Get ready! Fight it out! Counter!
よくもコケにしてくれたな。
Counter!
任せてください。目玉だ。点数をつける。とどめだ。調子に乗るな。無駄だ。見えて。目玉だ。こいつはハンデだ。そこだ。やろう。こいつがとどめだ。目指すだ。ビッグバンが。そこだ。そこだ。ファイナルステージ。そこだ。そこだ。こんなものか。ビッグバンが。やろう。くたばれ。無駄だ。今度は俺が相手だ。うわ大丈夫ですか。 だな。
ビッグバン
そう俺が相手だ。
甘い。
修行の成果を見せてやる。
ファイナルステ
逃がさないぞ。やったぜ。こう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
The battle's about to start. Good luck. Ready? Fight!
バカな。なめんじゃねえ。遅いぜ。俺をし叫んじゃねえぞ。やがれ。かかってこい。そんなもんかよ。よくもコケにしてくれたな。なめんじゃねえ。かかってこい。
つまらん。さあ消し飛べ。見えるぞ。クラトーだ。どんな気分だ。さあ褒めてやろう。そこか。どうだ。そこだ。古いすぎるのか。点数を調子に乗ってつまらん。そこだ。しまった。ここを見て。そこ。見えるぞ。どうだ。無駄だ。そんなバカな。俺がやってやら。絶対に見える。そのどうした。そんなもんかよ。つまらん。つまらん。しゃくな。程度で俺がやってやら。まあまあだな。なめんじゃねえ。始まったんだ。
断してたぜ。遅いぜ。
よし行くか。
俺が撃ってやる。絶対に許さねえ。なめんじゃねえ。油断してたぜ。なめんじゃねえ。遅いぜ。そんなバカだ。クソだね。
Well, it looks like one way or another, defense is shifting a bit.
Time to begin the match! Ready? Fight!
下がっている。
なめんじゃねえ。やがれ。うわっ。うわっ。なめんじゃねえ。そんなもんかよ。なめんじゃねえぞ。
ここを見ている。ビッグバン下がっている。
なめんじゃねえ。遅いぜ。なめんじゃねえ。どうした。そら無駄だ。どうした。
点数をつけるとすればそこだ。そこだ。しまった。こんなものかよ。するの。
ここは譲ってやるか。ここは譲ってやるか。俺を信じろ。どうした。なんだと。
次は助けんからな。アドだ。来てくれ。行くぞ。 こっちだ。そこだ。調子に乗る気でどうした。こんなものか。おじそこだ。行くぞ。するなよ。点数をつけるか。行くぞ。これで終わりです。そんなバカな。下がっている。大丈夫。僕はまだやれます。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
And here we go.
Get ready! Let's go!
終わりだ。甘い。そこですか。その調子。長生きだよお前。貴様の相手はこの僕だ。その調子。忍者の野郎。覚悟はいいか。私もろとも。まだ。行くよ。そら黙っときな。逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。行くぞ。そらや。逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。だー。手を抜いているのかい。今度は俺が相手だ。どこ見てんのか。手を抜いているのかい。まずい。生きた。消えろ。今だ。
Remember kids, most people actually are trying to understand the game. Don't go in when you don't need to.
多少腕を上げたようですね。盾になる以外でも役に立つじゃありませんか。
Get ready for battle! Ready? Fight!
油断してたぜ。なめんじゃねえ。遅いぜ。
Always remember when facing Trunks and similar characters with extremely long, crouch heavy buttons. If your super dash is blocked, you have to be a little bit more careful about your follow-up attack, if you even have one. You may want to use your assist to keep him still long enough to get something out of it. This is particularly true when facing a team that has Krillin in it, as you often end up putting yourself in a lot of effort to do something that Krillin often counters simply by healing his team or himself. If your character does not have good super dash mix-ups, the situation often changes negatively for you. Strong teams with good defense end up soaking up a lot of blue health damage, which Krillin can easily heal, or the defensive team can shift out the correct character due to their defensive ability and your need to leave them alone in certain situations. Omni Rabbit's team is built in this way as one of the most defensive and easily healed teams synergy-wise in the game. Since you can never be absolutely sure that you should just go in and can afford to do so safely, and when you do land hits, they're often not particularly punishing or damaging. Since using your meter to get in is also a difficult prospect, you have to be very careful about this. But with Krillin eliminated in this case, we might be able to see something specific happen. No, I guess that training on super dashes is a thing. But even with just Adult Gohan and Trunks, more or less the same thing happens. While neither character is completely able to do this, losing Krillin usually indicates to the player that they should be more careful with how they switch in and out, and if things get really bad for one character, they can always use Sparking Blast, which is available and more powerful, obviously because Krillin has been lost. In short, keeping your team's synergy abilities in mind can allow you to build plans from the very beginning. Even if your opponent's full intent is to disrupt one plan, they have to go through layers and layers of plans, constantly adapting faster than you or severely outdamaging you in order to be effective. On the other hand, going up against an offensive team, which is effectively what we're about to see, is about making sure that you're not in the space where they can convert into maximum damage. As the player gets better, it gets harder and harder because this space expands exponentially. This high offense coupled with the large amount of control you can often see means that any amount of meter available to the opponent will generally result in you taking a massive amount of damage. In this case, defense isn't just about keeping yourself safe until your opponent makes a mistake, as they're unlikely to. A very measured player, especially using this team, is unlikely to make obvious mistakes because they're spending so much time carefully watching both their meter and their assist timers. It's often in your best interest to take advantage of the fact that their mindset is toward not giving you options. Get out of their range and super dash at them. This is not because you expect to get away from them or that you won't get countered for trying, but it's actually because really good players with strong offensive teams do more or less the same damage either way. In other words, getting hit by that crouch heavy is not generally a massive change in how much damage you'll take when up against characters like Tenshinhan or Teen Gohan. You're better off using the super dash to try to control your opponent's flow and make them less willing to just outright attack you. This gives you enough time to move forward sometimes, build up some of your own meter, and then use that meter to get out of their pressure in one way or another. In short, you have to take risks while you still have health in order to make sure that you have some options. As you can see here, the super dash does help, and with offensive teams, it's not usually so effective that they can do anything else. Their mind is on hitting you wherever you are. Whereas you can just apply the M. Bison style and for the most part, use this to attack them outright. Once they've actually started to slow down and not just overwhelm you with their attacking skill, you can take a little bit more time for yourself and try to think about how to solve your problems without going for the super dash as the constant. But it is still better to start there when your opponent's damage potential is so high that it really doesn't matter if they hit you with their 2H or not.
It's time to face your opponent.
This sort of match is difficult from both sides, both because characters are similar and have somewhat similar game plans, and because both are capable of functioning in the air so effectively. On one side, Vegeta Blue is probably the best option, as he has the most methods for repelling other terrible situations, while still having all his options open. Getting through that requires a lot more focus than most things Kid Buu can do, as Kid Buu tends to have breaks, and he can only change this by actually attacking, which means that if the opponent decided not to move, you're in a lot of trouble. Once you have to deal with Vegeta Blue along with his assists, it can be difficult to approach, even though this team does have strong attacks and good auto combos for dealing with it. Again, because of the difference in damage that is available. But in this case, Vegeta Blue goes down primarily because of an unwillingness to back off in aerial situations. Fortunately, we're going to see that come out here because Bardock really has no options for air defense other than air backdash or similar. And our Bardock player on the blue side definitely does not have the defensive instincts required to defend from the ground. Bardock is also not a character who benefits very heavily from their deflect in strings, as even though he can punish, his punish is a little bit lackluster, and a lot of players can get out of it or just use a level 3 in a timing that really would surprise you. But with this change, now we have Kid Buu left at the end, and he is able to play footsies outright with these characters, as neither Vegeta nor Cooler has a very strong specific way of approaching on the ground without potentially getting more or less eaten, honestly. Kid Buu can therefore play the ground game outright rather than having to go in the air, using the candy beam and other similar tricks. He's a reasonably difficult character to approach when your character doesn't have certain tools. But that one looked like it was sort of quick. An interesting choice given the distance. What button would one have even hit? Well, that's what happens when you overdo things.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
Part of the Super Dash bot purpose was to deal with a specific way that Bardock can keep the opponent out.
前から血祭りにあげてやる
Bardock basically has two modes, either approach or space control. When he is in the middle space, he's not generally a particularly strong character. But in both of those modes, Super Dash, if you expect him to be moving, is in your favor. Fortunately, he is tall and can hurt you for doing it with just light or medium sometimes. So it mainly depends on how creative your character can be from the air when using it. You're going to need to use your assists, various tricky moves, or just use characters who have really strong methods of dealing with things after their super dash in order to get real effectiveness out of it. But you can certainly stop Brawly from playing the standard game he plays. Because while you can absolutely armor your super dash, it slows down his game plan quite a lot. As noted, 16 is not actually a character you want to do this against. 16's style of controlling space is completely different, and he just has direct upward powerful attacks that can be used in that situation. What he lacks is the ability to deal with people who are attacking him from the air from decently far away, like Vegeta Blue. This is a much fairer matchup, but obviously there's even more chance for moving around. This said though, in this particular case, Cell has enough meter at the moment to be a problem for all three members of Rune Siren's team. Meaning that he can basically hold down the fort once the others have gained enough meter either through attempted space control or flight as a generality. However, he does have to go into a little bit more offense than usual, since otherwise he will find himself facing the same super dash. Basically, Cell is used to being able to handle opponents who attack from the ground by going into the air, but opponents who are just as comfortable in the air are usually not that threatening directly, but that doesn't mean Cell gets to do anything. He needs the meter to create mix-ups that those players then have to deal with. What it does help with though is avoidance of the Dragon Rush. On the other hand, Cell isn't really a character who tends to worry about that move anyway. You can already see that in this case, once Brawly has been put into the mental state of defend from the super dash, he becomes a much less terrifying character to deal with as a whole. And knowing the exact height, angle, or similar to attack with your super dash from can help quite a lot. Ooh, an unfortunate whiff from Vegeta, but Even that minor moment there is a mix-up. The opponent cannot be sure whether or not you will go for the final finishing vanish, a low, or the Dragon Rush. Practicing to parry, well, to tech the Dragon Rush in that situation is usually about the only thing you can do. A straight up jump with a forward block can get you out of some situations, but not necessarily against Kid Buu. He is, however, one of the characters where it is at least stressful for the opponent to try to do it. But like Piccolo, he does have an upward grab to deal with it.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
You can see a simpler form of application of the same principle.
It's all or nothing!
Amirada generally will not be looking to do the same things, as it's not really necessary to control the same place on the screen. However, if Broly does start to do too many armored moves or otherwise become stressful in that way, the Super Dash will probably still get used. Even with Gohan's ability to just deal with it outright, if you don't want to have to deal with offensive Broly, for whatever reason, that Super Dash from the air is one of your stronger options. Fortunately, on the other hand, these characters are defensive enough to lure Broly into making attacks which then they can punish. The reason it's possible to do this is much simpler than you think though. When you are able to have strong confidence in your character to either get out of pressure or punish strongly after a Super Dash, you don't have to feel like you're losing out as much if you just stand there and wait for them to come to you. This of course does depend on the offensive skill of the opposing player, but if you don't really believe in it, a good defensive team like this one can literally just sit the whole thing out. That, however, was a well-measured kill, which can be a problem at least a little bit, except for the fact that really, the two characters needed to deal with Cell are these two, and not Adult Gohan at all. So, the question is, was that an entire plan to simply leave Adult Gohan and see how much longer he could last out? Cell does have a lot of good ways of putting pressure on other characters. But even if it was not a specific goal, the awareness that one can do something is sometimes a good enough reason to keep trying. Similarly, this is basically not a threat. No matter what happens, it changes the opponent's rhythm, whereas unless they manage a very specific thing, it's unlikely that Krillin is actually going to fall. The ability to make those decisions quickly in real time, though, is definitely something you have to train in this game.
世界もみんなの笑顔も俺が守ってみせる。
In the case of this team, Broly's armor helps him far less. However, they do have that same, at least minor issue approaching, meaning that he gets to play his air game a bit more. And since threatening to play his air game can only really be countered well by the opposing super dash, it changes a lot of that very clean-based play that we're used to seeing. It doesn't really make it impossible, but it makes it stressful enough that you can't get too much. While Broly is anything but a zoner, with the correct teammates and a proper control of space, the situation shifts quite a lot. What Broly must fear is the fact that in that stance, the opponent is usually likely to build up far more meter than he is, and this team does not mess around when it comes to meter usage. As demonstrated. For 16, this situation is actually technically easier. Even though 16 does not apply the exact same air game as Broly, he does have a lot of good options, and his zoning attacks tend to cause the opponent to have to do certain things in particular spaces. After they've blocked those attacks, you can watch the landing space very carefully to see what you can get. Your concern is if they miss. The other general quote-unquote weakness of this team is that they are generally easier to deflect. You can easily see some of their attacks coming, or their concept of counterattack spacing, as they must use a lot of attacks to keep themselves in the right position. Managing to deflect them also tends to throw off their positioning. But once that meter is available, terrible things will start to happen to you. Ah, the jab didn't stop it. But you can at least somewhat see it, because you know that their attack must be coming from fairly long in, and it's not in their best interest to stop short. You can assume that opponent approaching means time to deflect. Most of the good open up stuff from Tenshinhan and even Bardock often involves hitting an opponent who is specifically on the ground. You don't need to beat them by getting up in the air. You just have to be careful at when you actually move toward them. If you have control of the rest of the match more or less, therefore, you should be looking for your opportunity to deflect, but not too heavily, as the opponent will simply slow down and wait for you. If you're worried about getting opened up in neutral and that converting into big damage though, you can resolve that situation in that way most of the time, because simply making an opponent who feels that they have good pressure on you hesitate for the chance of getting deflected, even if it makes them wait for the deflect, you still have a better chance of getting something out of this, as you get much more freedom of movement just from that moment of hesitation.
ありがとうございました。僕もっと頑張ります。
In this match, the optimal thing to do is switch out Bardock as early as you can. Brawly is not really a hard counter to the character, but he does have enough different ways to make Bardock's life miserable meterless as compared to Bardock's effectiveness when he has no meter, that you generally don't want to start the fight this way. If both meters are completely empty, I would say that Brawly is at least at a slight advantage. And of course, we all know slight advantages multiply quite a lot when players are less familiar with the opposing character or player.
Get ready.
And of course, while that does not demonstrate it, the fact is that most of that, if not all of that, was deflectable not even on reaction. You could just assume it was coming and deflect it. This is also because Bardock as a character doesn't benefit that much from taking advantage of those situations where you've gone for deflect. He's also not a character that deals well with things like Wake Up Vanish. Unfortunately, Cell's particular style of movement doesn't have any real advantage over Bardock. It is decent against Vegeta though. Vegeta has relatively linear attacks that Cell is decently good at getting out of the way of. And his shorter range generally gives Cell enough of an advantage for crazy things to start happening. That right there is a full-on attack.
Super Vegeta.
Vegeta, win.
くそ誰だ俺を誰だと思ってやがる
to begin the match.
In this case, the situation is a bit better as Bardock is not the point character for the team. Meaning that Kid Buu gets a little more freedom, as he has that strong lateral attack to deal with a lot of brawly stuff, and at least some differences in how he can attack from the air. He does not, however, get to play standard footsies and therefore has to put up with a lot of brawly's pressure, for certain definitions of pressure. Kid Buu is strong at dealing with other aerial characters precisely because he has so many options from those same positions. If the opponent hangs in the air, you can simply attack them. You can super dash at ranges that most characters don't easily deal with. And similarly, you can just go into Buu Ball to deal with anyone who attempts to approach. With this particular team, it's even easier as assists cover a lot more of the space if the opponent decides to hang back. But Buu has decided to go forward anyway, into a bad situation. Whereas Bardock is more of a defensive assist, for when you don't really know what to do and you don't want to deflect and leave yourself open. His strong forward range means that you really don't have to care at all for the most part. If you want to move and you're not confident that moving is a good idea because your opponent might do something, call Bardock for no move. This is particularly useful when your way of dealing with this is to go up in the air, as you get a couple of weird mix-up style things as just demonstrated, and you get to confuse your opponent a lot. Even more usefully, this particular style of play allows a lot of it as Bardock tends to recharge relatively quickly, meaning you get a lot of options here. You can even use it to half telegraph an approach that isn't going to be really happening, and mess with your opponent that way, or cover your retreat in similar ways. Bardock, on the other hand, in this particular team, is likely to end up in this situation at the end, to go from point to final. I'd be mostly okay with it. He has an arsenal of moves that does not really cause him to require assists that much, as he can cover all vectors once your awareness rises high enough. He also has combos that he can end himself and put you where he wants, so you don't need to be able to switch into a different character mid-combo in order to maximize your advantage. But we are back to the complex dance of defense versus aerial-based offense. This team is a relatively hard counter, but they also don't deal well with being inched up on the ground. In fact, they're really weak to it, for the most part. As they must always commit to something, and that committing is what allows the aerial player to get into the air and do what they want. You can generally watch for what happens when two of them get close enough, and the question becomes, is Trunks going to actually react? Is he going to do anything this time? Or is he more or less going to let Kid Buu jump away, or in some cases even toward him, without immediately doing anything? The situation is relatively asymmetrical as you've seen here though. It takes forever to wear down Trunks. And from the other side, Bardock and Similar do get to very often move to their own healing space to go back out and let the next character in that team take their chances at approaching. The key to this therefore is knowing when to call your assists to mess with the defensive team. Without it, you not only do not have a lockdown capacity, you do not have enough distraction to make it through them. Defense in this game is hard enough without having to worry about more extra characters altogether. But defending against a character like Vegeta Blue who can just do things and not have to worry about his timers, you generally just don't get to do enough damage to him in the way you would want to discourage him from using these tactics. While he is relatively slow as an assistant himself, once you have shifted to a form of the game where using assists is going to be a serious thing, he's one of your best options outright. And then you have even that super confusing interaction between the bubblegum ball and Dragon Rush, which I still don't understand, to be honest. While Buu is in no way a zoner, it's almost always true that Buu's Candy Beam is going to be more effective than most slower zoners at doing what they want. In other words, if the Candy Beam clashes with you, don't throw another beam. It is a zoning war that, for most characters, you're not going to win. At this point, for example, it's more or less Vegeta's turn again, as Bardock has little chance of beating his grandson, or Krillin, in a straight-up fight, but Vegeta Blue can do whatever he wants. Essentially forever. And as soon as he has assists available to him to mess with the opponent's head, their situation changes rapidly. The other final result, of course, is that eventually it ends up often being Vegeta who's lost, resolving at least part of the problem. You still have both of your stronger confusion-based systems. It's just that now they are only able to help each other. Still not a terrible idea. But once reduced to one character, this situation is generally not so much in your favor unless you have enough meter to make it count. And here's some of that making it count now. Final result, advantage to adult Gohan, but there may be a way. It's no longer looking like there's a way. And there's the defense we were talking about. When you have the clear ability to just go, my opponent is going to attack me in this string, and I'm just going to uppercut. It allows you to feel much more confident about keeping yourself alive. Your opponent has to flinch even on your wake up sometimes.
Time to begin the match!
So, things are a little different here, but still not that different. The key point on both sides is targeting. Kid Buu's side wants to not be in the air constantly because they are good at zoning from the ground, but enough to make it hard for the other team to target. The important thing in this case being, when you realize that the situation has not gone quite as you planned it, just call your assist immediately. Don't think, don't worry about it. And that's all you have to think about. Whenever anything feels weird, hit an assist button. This is actually true on both sides for this matchup. There's particular choices in assists make them both handle each other very cleanly. It also creates enough chaos to make targeting on both sides difficult enough that the real neutral of the game only happens when both sides have ended up really far apart. Even more usefully, due to the elevation styles that happen on both sides, if you happen to do something other than the assist itself, the situation still tends to be in your favor. In other words, if you call your other character, they can both convert off of the super dash situation more easily than most other characters, and get out of bad situations easier. That missed? Huh. So what you can expect here is an explosive defeat based on massive amounts of meter. But there is quite a lot of health. Kid Buu is still one of the better assists for Vegeta to have here, but Vegeta being the one that needs to recover makes that a little bit difficult. A good choice in the zoning, recognizing the position relative to the beam and moving out after the correct one. Machida relies a lot on neutral once this starts, but he actually can handle it, as a lot of his spacings allow him to do his stand heavy, in ways the opponent can't easily deal with. Enough! Enough!
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! It's all or nothing! Go!
The Bardock mirror would generally be a bad idea, but in this case, Abu Bardock has the advantage of better assists for the mirror matchup itself specifically. This matchup is also, functionally, not so great for Vegeta, but again, a matter of correctly using your assists. But it looks like we're still going to be seeing a lot of requirement for that training with the defense spot. Remember that the training with our defense spot is more so about learning to be calm in situations than it is about making sure you actually can always defend. Defense in this game is hard, but it doesn't get any easier if you're stressed out about it. And if you're stressed out enough that your reaction to being placed on the defensive is, I should attack, your situation is way worse.
めえら相手をしてやるまでもなかったか。ザコが。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Mata 虫けらが死にに来たか。ウロリ、生きていたのか。
Ready?
消えろ。これでもかんぞ来い。楽しめそう。
Kame's ability to shut down Broly's air game, even if he can't do a whole ton of damage while doing so, is an overall advantage for many reasons. Dealing with Cell in the same way, however, is a bit more work. Cell is, however, more likely to be hit by certain beam-style attacks, and unlikely to try anything in its response. Even though Cell does have the Kamehameha himself and can counter beam with beam, it's unlikely to be one of his main playstyles, and he doesn't benefit as much from it than most other characters. Sixteen's methods don't work as well against opponents who are not approaching, as a lot of the spacing setups he gets from forcing the opponent to avoid or block certain moves aren't so easy to apply proactively from his own side. With Sparking Blast, Broly can even more heavily increase his mix-ups after the Super Dash, but against this team it might not help that much. The opponent is quite used to it, they already have the main defensive mindset in hand, so Broly mostly just ends up spending a lot of meter to get in at all. This is a situation where going from point to final is not all that helpful to you. He is, however, a usefully strong character when utilizing that particular aspect there. Because he does have this very constant ability to approach and the opponent has to respect it, or make themselves open, he can afford to use a lot of meter on Vanish. Still, at the end of the day, you need enough health to outlast your opponent entirely, and with no assists, this can be a difficult proposition from Broly's side.
Get ready for battle!
In order to leverage Broly's effectiveness in this situation, as mentioned before, if Bardock stays in, you can play a certain form of the game. And if he is pushed out immediately, you should probably just armor up immediately. Between Broly's armor, his relatively grounded style, and the fact that he can just deflect a bunch of stuff because he's expecting it, he's a difficult character to deal with from the perspective of a character like Bardock, who's mostly meant to set up situations. Remember, guard your legs, kids. Overheads is slow. Well, for the most part, they're slow. But there's enough meter for some big kills here. And if not, enough for setups for later. As a general rule in this game, something that's hard to learn interestingly if you play too many other fighting games, you should almost always be blocking low. This is advice you get as a beginner in all fighting games. But in this game in particular, because there's so much going on the screen, and because your opponent can literally slide dash up to you, there's literally no time to react to lows. This is also partially why you hear people talking about how characters are good based on whether or not certain things they can do are lows. Some of them are slow enough if your opponent decides to try to hit from max range when you're not expecting it. But if they're coming in for pressure, you should be guarding your feet, as the chances of you getting caught in some overhead out of that are really small. raw, but good timing as a whole. Ooh, but the super risky charge and the loss that goes with it.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
Against this team, what was mentioned against the last is even more true. While Brawley does get to play more of his air game, having his barrier up is even stronger and somewhat more required. However, 16 can handle a lot of this match, probably without getting killed too early. As an assist, Brawley might be a little bit more helpful here. But his superior range over Bardock really helps in a lot of situations you'd expect him to have problems. Once again, guard your legs. All this is a real juggle. And that moment. Not necessarily super helpful, but still enough to do something. Wearing down Bardock and the opponent's pressure character using very specific techniques means that eventually he won't be available anymore at all. You have to be very careful about this though, for that reason. Dancing around too much in neutral with a character like that means that you're building up meter on both sides, whereas the pressure character gets these live theirs, and you don't. Now, we have the situation where Brawley is facing off with potentially a weakened Bardock, and a hard-working Super Saiyan Vegeta. But if this is not a kill, then Sparking is still active. And Vegeta does not deal that well with Brawley armor. Unfortunately, he left himself too open there. Unfortunately, we have learned that some members of the team that often rely on me directly to put in their bot for them do not have that option in this game, as the share play function of various things does not seem to work at all. Fortunately, the bot is again not that difficult to input yourself, It's just that we cannot therefore use it in the situation where I'm particularly aware of every part of the input to do the research. This is also why our research into them has been slowed somewhat, as it is difficult to get them to everyone with developer having a clear enough knowledge of exactly what form of each one everyone has.
The battle's about to start. Good luck. Are you ready? Fight it out!
This one we've had a lot of discussion about. The main final result was that Gotenks actually handles Brawly fairly well if you have the speed and skill to do the jump recognition. But our Gotenks player has in fact had direct access to the bot and direct access to that particular one with that particular requirement. Meaning that from their side, they have quite a lot of experience locking on to opponents who are close but below. This is less effective against 16 because, again, if you are in that position, 16 can easily just respond by grabbing you out of the air. And Gotenks is no exception to that problem. But we know it is eventually going to come back down to Brawly at least a bit. And there could be entire plans built around that concept. Vegeta is a generally middle-of-the-road character. He's not specifically able to do the same level of defense that adult Gohan and Trunks can, but he's not bad at it, and with the correct assists, he can use them as his backup to make it difficult for the opponent to approach. He's a little bit more effective when he has Nappa, but Gotenks is troublesome to an opponent who has not started to move yet. Downside to this being that Brawly is now back, but without enough meter to actually give Gotenks stress. His speed and size make him one of the characters most able to break through Brawly's armor without committing that heavily. Operating at constant meter disadvantage in this position is not necessarily going to lead to too many problems directly though, as this team does not tend to convert very strongly in terms of meter. Mostly what you need is enough awareness to recognize when something bad is likely to happen to you. Goten's Shine Missile attack is in fact one of his strongest options here for this precise reason. As it distracts the opponent enough and makes them want to move in ways that make meter usage more effective. That, for example, is one of the safest possible switches in the game. The opponent is still caught in stun of one side, you up on the other side, and had they managed to make the block, which they probably did, you just get the switch for free, and usually without taking any serious damage because you have stuck the opponent in the air, making it difficult for them to counter-attack the incoming character. This comes down to more or less a timer scam and favors Gotenks super heavily. With more meter to play out, better air movement, it just wasn't likely to go Brawly's way. And so we push forward.
This should be a great fight.
One of the main weaknesses of the Brawly team here is that they have relatively linear assists. Getting true mix-ups in order to do anything to such a defensive team is really hard as a result. It requires a lot of understanding of execution of when to call the assist and how. And a lot of combination, meaning that Brawly has to spend a lot of time getting close to the opponent without actually going for an attack. The assists are helpful with this, but he's not exactly a character you can spend a lot of time walking forward with and expect much to happen. The armor, though, does help. And when facing a defensive opponent who will effectively let you armor up, there's really no good reason to not do it. Because Brawly's aim in this match is generally not to actually land his first attack. It is to launch one fake attack that the opponent then tries to respond to from the wrong range. And then the real one. From there, there's a minor mix-up with, again, calling assists, going for Brawly's command grab after a micro step, and similar things. Fortunately, the character takes a lot of punishments, so it's probably fine. In fact, you can think of that as the main purpose of Brawly's armor. The opponent cannot push him back with beams, they cannot keep him out with standard zoning style tactics. They have to let Brawly get to where he wants to be and face whatever he feels like doing to them in that time frame. Most people, of course, have no reason to give Brawly that much space, but if you're facing an opponent who will, then armor up and walk on it. Or jump. Or dash a little bit, whatever works for you. This is actually one of the primary differences between him and 16, in that 16's armor relies on him actually launching attacks that can be hit punished, whereas Brawly just gets armor. Cell has no such luck, but Cell also has an option for when the opponent is kept very still from far away, especially with this team. When Brawly is up, Cell can get a lot more of his quote-unquote command grab than when Brawly as an assist is no longer available. Ooh, good timing for that sparking actually. Opponent has very little meter, meaning that any damage they do is very likely to just get recovered the whole way. Allowing for a bit more risky play. Unfortunately, it was not a good timing in terms of how much meter Cell had available, but in the sense that the intention would have been to land a level 3 or something, then obviously it was good. Free switch, even if it wasn't the best idea. Might as well use meter for that sometimes if you've got it. Ooh, that spacing. Now, Krillin has a hard time. Or not. Had that been used for vanishes instead, it would probably have been more effective, as Krillin did not yet have enough meter himself to just level 3 and immediately solve the problem. Due to Krillin's ability to do lateral attacks, this is not honestly that easy for Cell, so it's looking like it might go south. And almost. But perfect timing. You can in fact react to Vanish with that super. You can also react to Vanish with a couple other supers that you really would not expect. However, you must, in most cases, do the super in the wrong direction, which can be tricky because you can only do it at the very last moment. Cell gets the bonus of being able to do that to Vanish really easily.
It's time to face your opponent.
What happens when an unstoppable force hits an immovable object? Well, generally, neither one wants this to happen, so it's just better for the immovable object to start moving first.
Ready? Let's go!
In short, this matchup is where the super dash and actually approaching matters a lot for this team. Another useful option is actually having Krillin in early, because Krillin is much less linear than Trunks and doesn't have to worry as much. The obvious problem with this being that you can run the risk of Krillin falling, but At this stage of the match, where there's not enough meter to go for a big kill, it's unlikely that Krillin's going to get finished off either. In this situation, it might be a little trickier. While this team is not the easiest to zone and Krillin's zoning is unconventional, his ability to quickly switch between the zoning flow and the other is really helpful. And as much as anyone that ever mocks the character in canon, Krillin knows how to take some punishment. He's been doing it for long enough. Another powerful option in this match is in fact Adult Gohan's elbow. Since the opponent cannot always just start their offense whenever they want, and therefore have to either start blasting or go into the air, Gohan really doesn't have to do that much direct thinking. He can either go for elbow or go for uppercut. The ability to do Gohan's elbow from the air is one of his strongest strengths. If you have meter, even if you had no chance of landing it normally, he will go to the opponent. He doesn't care. Matches like this will always last long because, again, the dynamic shift is relatively hard to get out, but this match is usually decided somewhere around that moment, actually. There's almost always some super dash somewhere in it that decides the match. If the super dash lands, the defensive team wins, and if it fails, there's just enough meter to go for a kill later somewhere. And we're about there now. Now this isn't a death sentence specifically, but just in terms of knowing that these two players are fairly evenly matched, at this point you generally go, yeah, this match is greatly favoring Tenshinhan. As there's simply too much freedom of movement allowed, especially without Trunks specifically. Even if it could be won in standard turns, it might not be able to be won in time. This happens because, as noted, Krillin's methods of converting off damage in certain situations are really iffy. And you can't afford to just spend all the meter on stuff when you have this situation. On the other hand, there is the huge advantage that Krillin can still heal people after all of this stuff going on. Oh, and that super dash has probably sealed it. Probably. I don't actually know what happens because their health is really weird right now. But once again, not in time. It's those tiny moments that top players are paying attention to, realizing I have probably won this as of the tactics of this match at that moment. For this team, the situation is mostly the same.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
Since so much of the pressure will come from ground and shift ground movement, Trunks is not your optimal character. Trunks is stronger against this sort of team when he's on offense, but he can function very well as the point using assists specifically.
Get ready.
That said, since the opposing assists are not likely to cause problems, Trunks doesn't need to be in. He's not here to prevent things from happening. It's just unnecessary. Gohan is generally better suited to handling this as he can do whatever he wants to a certain extent, and once he builds up enough meter, it's really hard to break down. Trunks, of course, is therefore a much stronger assist to Teen Gohan in this sort of build-up than the other way around. And with Teen Gohan being able to slowly pump more and more of his meter into his super to power himself up, this situation slowly becomes really bad for the opponent. Sure, it always seemed like it was going to be unlikely that Gohan would ever actually get to high levels of this in a match. But depending on his backup, he absolutely can just be that character. He can just soak up the meter, use it for whatever he wants, and eventually power himself up to that level. But double conversion in a strong decision to more or less make sure Gohan is down. The problem with that is that Trunks is not really less effective. The only way here that Trunks can be considered less effective is that without Gohan as an assist, it's a little bit harder to hold off the pressure. But without Cooler to help with the pressure, I'd say it's still about even. Vegeta is, interestingly, still fairly effective in this sort of matchup. But his pressure is generally weaker, and he has to spend a lot more time trying to set up the Dragon Rush. While sparking is available, he has this option fairly easily. Without it, he has a really hard time. Since Krillin is quite mobile, and you can't ever be sure whether or not he intends to zone you or not. Going for the dive kick after the super dash was actually really gutsy because it's Trunks, he just hit you.
Trunks! Win!
世界もみんなの笑顔も俺が守ってみせる。
Get ready for battle!
Bardock's ability to control Team Gohan's positioning is very different from Bardock's ability to control Gotenks' positioning. This is not to say that Gotenks can do what he wants and approach Bardock, but rather that with the right assists,
Are you ready?
Gotenks can just stay in the air too long for Bardock to actually do anything. Eventually, Bardock will make some mistake, open himself up, and you get this sort of thing happening. Another good reason for the switch there being that Vegeta is the one with the best wake-ups, so once the situation has potentially changed around, Vegeta is the one that can wake up with invincible moves, has the basically screen covering super, and more or less doesn't have to worry about anything. Cooler is not much better at this, as he has a lot of grounded style moves and some beams, but still not really enough to control Gotenks' movement. He's forced into enough of a defensive position that one good confirm from either side will shift the situation. And he doesn't do much better against Vegeta. The Vegeta mirror, on the other hand, is almost completely based on whose assists attack the air better, or attack from the air better. Meaning that with Bardock and Cooler, the situation may be a bit better. Is this going to do anything? Sparking is still available, movement is still available. No, probably not. Note that this is still good to use because the spacing created by this move will allow a movement to get back up to level 2 on the meter, or go for even that sort of thing. With Cell support, Gotenks is able to remain safe enough to keep going. And the switch makes up to preserve the meter. Cell being bulkier and a little bit slower on the movement has a harder time evading Bardock as a whole. Is he going to be behind for this? No. So we're back in the same situation. Bardock has to continually try to track down and face Gotenks and his various non-shenanigans. But there was one good hit there that might help. Unfortunately, with sparking available, it's still possible. Nope, not this time. There we go. So confident in the perfect mix-ups. But there's another good reason for leaving Cell in here. If Cell is the first character to fall in this group, the situation hasn't actually gone all that poorly, as he was the least necessary. But it looks like a missed approach, or mistimed approach, ends in corner pressure and a lot of damage. But even then, still not quite enough. Overall though, it has shifted back based on that decision. Vegeta does still have a strong chance of doing this though, because he is a character who can, again, just get pissed off and do this. But the opponent's awareness of that being likely allowed them to stay safe from it. Games of this type are often very heavily skewed toward your understanding of where your opponent's hard-to-reach spots are. The space on screen that you can occupy that they will have the least chance of effectively hitting you. You shouldn't decide it based on whether or not they have an attack that hits that part of the screen at all, but rather based on how much of that attack you're actually worried about dying to. But we've definitely covered all the main flows so far. So I'll be leaving it to the players to show off the matchups in a more direct way.
俺が殺してやる。せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。無駄なことどこへ行く。行くぞ。楽しみ。もう終わりか。楽しませてもらおうか。どうしたカメハメハ。そろそろ来た。行くぞ。行くぞ。すぐに終わらせてやる。砕け切れ。バイサート。バイテア。セイ。しかれ。セイ。テア。少し変わるな。さて。生きた。すぐに終わらせてやる。さて、協力してもらおう。地球ごと消えてなくなる。暇つぶしにはなったな。不意打ちでも狙っていたのか。残念だった。
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
また一匹虫けらが死にに来たか。初めから全力でかかってくるんだな。
Get ready!
じゃあ少しだ。変ですか。また行こう。交代だ。交代できますか。ここは譲ってやろう。
どうした。
行くぞ。まだだ。殲滅する。
どうした。
この程度で。来た。 俺も少しは役に立つか。
大丈夫か。どうした。任せてください。
立て直す。楽しめそうだ。お前の思い通りにはさせる。問題ない。
If you are not among the best at maximizing damage, you can still tell when your own skill is improving based on how long your matches last against other people who also are not perfect at maximizing their damage. As your judgment improves, so does the length of time it takes to defeat you. But a clean application of sparking in that case brings an end to that particular match.
スーパーサイヤ人の壁、その先を俺はさらに超えてしまった。世界もみんなの笑顔も俺が守ってみせる。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
the three members of this team, Cooler is probably the best suited to facing off with Brawly, as Cooler has enough tools to blast Brawly before he can do any specific thing.
今殺してやる。
この俺が未来を変えてみせる。
無駄なこと。
まあまあです。無駄なこと。遅いぜ。
問題ない。
なめんじゃねえって。
This is also tactical in terms of spacing on screen. When at far end of screen, it's much less likely that Bardock can lock you down enough to seriously harm you. Meaning that as long as you can buy enough time to switch when you need to, the situation is in your favor. Now here's the matchup we were talking about before. Cooler's long range and general flow, making it possible for him to stop certain of Brawly's options, as well as his strong control of spacing relative to bringing Brawly to corner and similar, makes it harder for Brawly to do as he likes. Without him therefore, and with Brawly still at relatively high health, even if Cell and 16 have problems, as long as it doesn't involve being put too close to the corner for too long, it's likely that, tactically speaking, the Brawly team has the advantage. Ooh, what a missed execution, and there goes Cell, evening it up cleanly. That interaction you've just seen is one of the main reasons why Vegeta has issues with this character. Brawly can simply hang in the air long enough to completely deal with all of Vegeta's options there. And has those. The precise nuance of where on the screen you end up after your super dash matters a lot to Brawly defense. This is actually fairly slow though. Yeah, it basically is too, that level 3 is actually too slow to do any damage to Brawly in Sparking. But here comes pressure. And there's no sparking to prevent it this time. That said, we're now down to that. Oh, maybe not. Theoretically, Brawly did have the advantage, but the immediate super dash in reaction to Brawly taking the space above where Bardock can normally attack, clinches the victory.
is about to begin. It's all or nothing. Go!
Alright then, it seems like our newer arrival slash guest is also leaving Kame House Lobby today. We do only have 15 minutes or so left in the stream anyway. As always, note that we do this once a week, every Thursday from 7 Eastern 210. If you want access to any of the bots we were talking about, or in this case the one bot and the other ways to use it, you can check our website at 2-mk.org, and with our new navigation you can go straight to 2-mk.org/DBFZ-bot. You can always, of course, navigate to it normally, or find a link from our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC. As noted, we will not be having another bot form release. We are working on it. There's some interesting stuff from Android 21 going on, in combination with Yamcha of all people. But we do not yet have anything ready for release, and may not for some time, so tomorrow will in fact be another Dead or Alive Last Round lounge. They'll probably sans Honoka at the time. I say that, but Honokas show up all the time. Broly's armor does not necessarily last that long, but you can really start to see the effect of it when dealing with a character like Trunks. He can attack from far away, but the fact that he even starts to think about it is advantageous to Broly's timing. It also helps take advantage of the way that this team's assists work, namely Cell being able to keep the opponent out, and if that somehow fails, 16 making sure that they're in trouble if they happen to get too close. While Cell himself does not have the same sort of setup, once Cell has enough meter, he actually can play a mixed-up style game against even these defensive characters. So, Broly is good at gaining it, and Cell is good at using it. Once Cell has used the meter, he can leave and bring in 16, who will again help build it up, and has some honestly good setups off things. Especially things Cell does. He can, however, just use some of the meter himself, depending on the opponent's positioning. Generally, you want this situation to happen, as 16 can now run and bring back in Cell, who once again has meter because 16 got hit. It's basically soaking up your opponent's meter outright. Even now, Cell is still not in that much danger, and is at meter advantage even if it's small. He's more likely to survive and get out of this, even with this damage. Let's see what happens. Nope, this time he's dead. The difficulty here is that if Cell does fall, the other two are not so great at using the meter correctly. Brawley can, however, keep it going pretty well with just 2 or 3 to start off with, and from there using this to help him with his mix-ups when he needs to vanish in order to get the opponent opened up. Or just place them in a position on screen that benefits him more. Brawley actually benefits somewhat from Raw Vanish in that he gets to armor up right after it without the opponent really being able to do anything about it. One of the few characters in the game who actually just gets something off it. You can do similar things there with getting the opponent to believe that that's what you want to happen, and just blasting them instead. So most likely, given our standard flow, we'll be going into the last 2 or 3 matches of the night. It has been quite a push, and we have seen more effects from it than we kind of expected to see outright. But again, this game is heavily about awareness, so you're more likely to see results relatively quickly if you're used to fighting games, as most of it isn't about can I execute the thing correctly, but rather can I see and therefore make the correct decision.
無駄だ。さてどうした。さっさとしろ。しかない。無駄だ。どうした。セルがいい。どうした。さっ遊びは終わりだ。どこへ行くんだ。殺してやった。なんなんだ。殺しちゃった。スピードには自信があるんだ。ずっといる。なんなんだ。殺してやる。何でなりやがれ。クズめ。少しだけ。なんなんだ。さあ、楽しませてもらおうか。そろそろ。何か。よせ。このベジータ様を失望させるなよ。調子に乗りやがって。ファイナルそろそろ。どうだ。ゴテンクス。フレッシュ。どうだ。ゲロー。どうだ。計算だけでわかるもんじゃない。俺たちサイヤ人はな。何が目的かは知らんが、俺が貴様を信用することなどない。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
Alright then, given the length of the last match, we are now going into actual last match of the night.
It's all or nothing. Fight it out.
With full offense in play, this one may be a little bit shorter. So as I mentioned before, join us tomorrow for Dead or Alive Last Round, another one of our battle launches. And on Monday, if you are a Street Fighter V fan, as we'll be having our Mishmashing battle launch, which starts at the same time, but does tend to be a bit shorter. On Tuesday, we should probably be back to normal when it comes to the Tuesday train, i.e. Guilty Gear Exard Rev 2, another loser stays on lobby. Bear in mind that all lobbies are US East Coast. And while we're not too picky about the lag, you might be. So bear it in mind when deciding if to join. As far as we're concerned, stability is the only thing really necessary. As it is beginner enough that most of the time you'll learn something new today. Next Wednesday will almost certainly be our standard standby casual content, although in exactly what game is a little less clear. It's however most likely going to be Street Fighter V, possibly a continuation of this Wednesday's content. And of course that would bring us back around to another Thursday for another Kame House Lobby. As always, feel free to join us. As it's always good to get experience, and if you've been watching, you have a fairly good idea of how to take on most of the teams we play. So even as a beginner, you should still have some space to think. So came bad for Trunks. On the other hand, this does scale pretty hard. He can't heal himself though, so there's a lot to be seen here. The respace worked out though. Still, final moments of defense are very hard and one can twitch your way into defeat pretty easily. So, with victory going to the Red Ribbon Army this week, we bring our stream to a close. Thanks for watching. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Enjoy your training and good night everyone.